So Gretchen, Lauren, and Chris are all on, which is great. They're our presenters today, and we're really excited to be able to continue our hemp webinar series. I know we've all been learning a great deal this winter about hemp from if you were able to attend the professional development program, you had many, many weeks of hemp webinars and training, and then we had our wonderful hemp conference. And we want to continue with hemp education throughout the growing season. And I was talking to Gretchen before our conference and after, and we were brainstorming about some topics that she felt that she really wanted to get out to growers, focused on lighting requirements. Then we also started to think about other questions that we commonly get this time of the year. And I know for myself, one of the common questions that I have gotten over the last few years is about organic requirements for seeds, transplants, other planting stock and clones. A lot of questions around what is organic and how do we keep our starts and seedlings, clones, all of these things so that they are or can be certified. So today we are joined by Gretchen. Gretchen, how do I pronounce your last name? I know you told me a million times, but
it means shiny penny. So if you think of that in your head, say Schimelpfenig.
Schimelpfenig. I love it.
Yeah.
Shiny penny would be easier for me to pronounce. I will say that.
It's okay. You can say that too. The P is silent. That's what gets everyone tripped up.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us again today. And Gretchen is the technical and operations director for R11 and facilitates the organization's technical advisory council, and has been doing a lot of work on lighting in hemp and also water management, which we will be talking about in another month. And then we're also joined by Lauren Tonti from NOFA New York, and she coordinates the hemp certification program for NOFA New York, and Chris Grigsby from MOFGA, who coordinates the certified clean cannabis program there. So with that, because I know we have a lot to fit into the schedule today, Gretchen, I am going to turn it over to you. And thank you for correcting me, Resource Innovation Institute. And hopefully you can give us a brief overview of your organization as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to join you here today to talk about pre-planting stuff and lighting in particular. And then I'll join you later in the series to talk about irrigation and water. And I'll introduce you to a bit about what our Resource Innovation Institute, RII, is about, and how we can help Vermont growers and those growing in any sort of grow environment, outdoor, indoor, greenhouse. So I'm going to talk a little bit about key lighting and plant science terms, some of your options when using horticultural lighting to get plants started, and the effect of different spectral treatments that you might not yet understand, but there's academic research as well as cultivator trials that are proving out information, especially in cannabis and hemp. So, and then I'll finish up with some best practices for hardy starts that you can kind of run with, and definitely ask me questions in the chat after I speak so that you can follow up on those best practices. I'm Technical and Operations Director for RII. I lead our Technical Advisory Council. I deliver curriculum and write best practices guidance, and I manage the PowerScore resource benchmarking platform. You can get in touch with me anytime, and I'm a local here in Huntington, Vermont. RII is a nonprofit that's been helping measure resource efficiency in the cannabis cultivation market and is now expanding to help all controlled environment agriculture, so protected culture, growing vegetables and herbs and other cultivars. But we measure, inform, and verify to help stakeholders like governments, utilities, supply chain, growers understand the best practices so that they can design the best policies, create supportive programs for growers, and establish standards that make sense. And then growers can benefit from understanding verified processes like technologies and techniques, like the things I'll be sharing about today, so that they can achieve high key performance indicators, the benchmarks that can establish resource efficiency as well as profitability, and how they can outperform baselines. So we've been around for about 5 years. We are based in Portland, Oregon, but I would like to say our second home is in Vermont with me. And we have a lot of expertise that we bring to the controlled environment agriculture market. We have a lot of different members, over 70 members of different types, growers themselves, as well as the supply chain, standards organizations, efficiency programs, governments, and utilities. And we gather them together, as well as non-members, in our Technical Advisory Council, which is the heartbeat of RII that helps aggregate knowledge to guide the development of our best practices guides and advocate for informed policies. So the insights I share with you today are not just my ideas, they are also vetted and peer reviewed, so that we are providing the best guidance for the market that is brand agnostic. So you can see the type of working groups we gather together and the newest 2021 working groups that are tackling topics like emissions and design and construction. Our resource benchmarking platform was designed for cannabis and is being expanded for non-cannabis crops. And you can get key performance indicators like energy efficiency and water productivity, and understand system performance for things like HVAC and lighting equipment. You can use PowerScore Pro to get a ranked data set comparison of your complete portfolio and do other fun stuff. Efficiency programs are interested in helping growers become more efficient, and they're using PowerScore to do that. And some states like Massachusetts use PowerScore as a mechanism for growers to report resource consumption and production, so that they can have that as part of their licensure renewal or new licensure requirements. So keep your eyes on PowerScore. It might become relevant to you in Vermont as a self-auditing tool, but you can also use it today as a way to establish where do you stand on the pack, and check out where you sit on the scale and see if you're in the middle of the pack or you're doing really well in terms of energy efficiency or production. As I mentioned, we have best practices guidance. Some of the information I share today, you can check out as well in the LED lighting for cannabis cultivation best practices guide. And I'm gonna get into the science. So I didn't know if there was a question in the chat. I can't see it right now. I'll have to get to that chat after I do my little spiel. So
yeah, we're good. No questions yet.
All right, great. So we're gonna talk about plant science and go through the alphabet soup, and make sure that when we get to the best practices, you can really apply some of this science and understand why certain things might help your plants be more hardy when they're entering the field, or why your plants might be more leggy. So we're going to talk about these terms first, which are the P's. We've got the photosynthetically active radiation, which you might be familiar as PAR, the section of light wavelengths that drive photosynthesis, and it's described in nanometers, and the range is 400 to 700. Photosynthetic photon flux is the amount of that radiation that is produced by an electric lighting system each second. So that's in units of micromoles per second. And when you're using a light fixture, it will tell you it's ppf on a spec sheet. ppfd, photosynthetic photon flux density, is when the light fixture is put into practice and you plug it in and it starts putting out light, how much of that energy, how much PAR is actually being arriving at the canopy. So the light fixture can put it out, but what's actually arriving, how many photons are hitting the light surface, hitting the leaf surface each second. And that's described in micromoles per meter squared per second. And so because it's an area-based measurement, you can measure lots of PPFD measurements in a grow room or in a grow tent and understand what is the average light intensity that's hitting your plant canopy. So we will definitely revisit that. Photon efficacy is like the efficiency of a light fixture, and it says how efficiently can a light convert electrical energy into photons of that photosynthetically active radiation that the plant cares about. And it's described in micromoles per joule. And the higher the number is, the more efficient that lighting system is at converting electrical energy into plant photosynthetic energy. LED lights often have much higher PPE than high pressure sodium or other light options. And we'll talk about the different light options in future slides. Some other terms that we're going to talk about are DLI, but to illustrate PPFD first, I'll show you a picture of a light meter, but that shows you that PPFD is an instantaneous measurement. You can measure it outside in the sun, you can measure it inside a grow tent, you can measure it in a greenhouse as a mix of the sun and electric light energy, and it's going to tell you the light intensity. The amount of light intensity received over the period of time that a plant receives light, either from the sun or from an electric light or both, is called the photoperiod. And you can see an illustration of the light received by a leaf described as DLI. So DLI is the number of photosynthetically active photons, so photons in the PAR range, per area per day. So it's the sum of ppfd over the course of the day. So an indoor grow can have a DLI measurement, an outdoor grow can have a DLI measurement, and it all depends on what's providing the light. In terms of photons, they can all be described in the same units. Now let's talk about some terms that you might hear used when describing getting plants ready to go out in the field or when using lighting to supplement plant growth. So when choosing a light fixture, especially these days when you have LED light options, you might hear the phrase light recipe brought up. And a light recipe really describes a polychromatic spectrum, so lots of different colors from the wavelengths of the light spectrum made up of different LED diodes, often used to create specific red to blue or red to far red ratios. Other light fixture options can't make light recipes because they have a light bulb, and that bulb has a specific polychromatic spectrum that can't be adjusted. So an HPS has a kind of stereotypical light recipe, whereas LEDs, you can have a light recipe made by lots of different manufacturers with lots of different ratios between the blue and the red and the white diodes. So let's talk a bit more about plants. You're familiar with plants, long day plants and short day plants. We're going to be talking about short day plants here. Plants like cannabis and hemp are going to have flowers forming when the day length is less than 12 hours. So that's important when we're talking about getting plants ready for the field and offering them extra lighting. Long day plants are things like garden veggies, and they can bloom when they receive more than 12 hours of light. Photoperiod we described with the illustration on the previous slide. So this photoperiod is from 6:50 a.m. to 8:24 p.m. It's a period of time when organisms receiving illumination from any source of light. And phototropism, which is one that we're going to talk a little bit about today, is the orientation of a plant in response to light, i.e. shade avoidance, elongation, or stretch. And so when you hear the phrase a leggy plant, it means that the plant has been stretching and is experiencing phototropism and is reaching to get closer to the light. An illustration of the spectra that we were talking about on the previous slides is shown here. And we're talking about that 400 to 700 nanometer range. But I just wanted to share that cannabis plants are being experimented with outside of this range in both the UV, the 200 to 400 nanometer range, as well as the far red, 700 to 800 nanometer range. And those are going to be able to be provided by different types of light fixtures and may have different effects on plant growth and development and different quality expressions. So a light recipe illustration is shown here, and scientists call this a spectral quantum distribution, or an SQD. And it illustrates the distribution of flux per photon wavelength over the whole range of wavelengths for a given light fixture. So a high pressure sodium light may be used for flowering cannabis indoors or in a greenhouse is shown in the white line here. And you can see that a lot of the photons, a great quantity of photons, are being provided in the middle of the range in the yellow, orange, and red ranges, but not a lot in the blue. Whereas an LED shown here, a specific light recipe from a specific LED light fixture, there are lots of different rainbows that you could see, and we'll look at some more rainbows in a second. You can see there's more blue coming from this fixture, and that's a benefit of LED is the ability to provide a customizable amount of photons in pretty much any section of the spectra. And you'll hear broad spectrum lighting used to describe some LEDs and narrow spectrum lighting used to describe LEDs. And that just means that a broad spectrum lighting LED option is going to provide an amount of photons in pretty much every wavelength of the PAR range, kind of like this fixture you see here. Whereas a narrow band LED light spectra is going to perhaps provide some big peaks in certain wavelengths that they find are very important to that cultivar. So some lighting manufacturers are designing specific light recipes for things like specific tomatoes. And so they might have specific peaks for that cultivar. So here are some rainbows to look at. The fluorescent light might be used by hemp growers for early stages of plant growth. And you can see that it kind of is in narrow sections having peaks. You can see that it does have more blue than, say, a high pressure sodium light, but it is not providing a great degree of photons in a holistic broad spectrum way. The other rainbows are provided here in case you happen to be using metal halide, ceramic metal halide, or high pressure sodium in later stages of plant growth, just to show the illustration of how these different spectral quantum distributions really look in practice, regardless of whether you're in pre-planting or maybe in later stages of growth. But to get back to pre-planting, often you might be using a fluorescent light bulb, like a T5. And then there are lots of other options these days for LED to provide lower light intensities for earlier stages of plant growth. And light fixture manufacturers are actually starting to make what's called TLED, where it's a LED replacement for a T5 or T8 or even T3. And they are making them competitive for the horticultural lighting market. And the Design Lights Consortium is actually going to start listing those lamps so that you can start to look for a certified list of trustworthy, customizable LED T lights, not just the light fixtures that are usually more of a high light intensity. So when we're talking about the light effects on crop growth and development, there are a few, again, more scientific terms to think about. Photomorphogenesis is one of them, and that is used to describe the physical effect of light on plants, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about phototropism, i.e. the structure of the plant is changing in response to the fact that it's not maybe getting enough light. Other things that could change could be appearance, color, aroma, leaf size, and color can also be affected by or affect phytochemicals and nutritional content, i.e. a darker, purpler piece of food might have more anthocyanin in it, which also has nutritional benefits. Similarly with cannabis, you might have additional phytochemicals, the biological active compounds, like secondary metabolites having increased in proportion due to different photomorphogenesis effects. So color is often a result of phytochemical action, and phytochemical action in cannabis can be things like cannabinoids and terpenes. Lastly, a big effect of light on plant growth and development is going to be yield, the production of the desired biomass that you're looking for at the time. So using light in an early plant growth environment can allow for the grower to manipulate the plant growth to maybe have hardier stems, maybe bigger leaves, maybe a deeper, thicker root system, and then in later stages of plant growth, greater production of larger poundage of flowers. So with all of that alphabet soup and scientific jargon in mind, I apologize. This is a very quick presentation on a lot of research that's been done by a lot of really smart scientists, which are quoted in orange. Here are some research findings on spectral treatments. If you're thinking about using light to grow plants early in plant growth and are trying to manage quality effects, think about blue. Blue has the greatest effect on quality traits and is suppressive of stretch. A grower in Maine who's a medical grower and is a very smart lighting scientist and designer says that when he's using LED, he often feels like he gets too much blue stretch suppression in early parts of growth. And you can see why, because the light recipe has more photons in the blue range than when using others, including fluorescent. And so he actually lowers light intensity to increase stretch. So that's a good best practice to understand, is that if you're trying to manage stretch, think about, is my plant getting enough light intensity? And if so, maybe I need to think about the way I'm managing blue. So those two can be a push and pull. This grower sees that when using LEDs with a larger amount of blue, he lowers light intensity. Note that red is the greater driver of photosynthetic production of biomass, and that's usually the one that's more important to talk about when we're in later stages of plant growth, so I'll skip over that one, but far red is important to think about in terms of influencing morphology. And so it can increase leaf expansion and can induce stretching. So if you think about when the sun is going down and sunflowers turn towards it and stretch towards it, that is an example of far red in the natural world. And so you can use far red to put your plants to sleep or wake them up when using electric lighting. And so that's something to think about on the opposite side of the spectrum, is maybe if you want to induce stretch, maybe offer more far red or think about your far red ratios. So here's the final takeaways. First of all, definitely get yourself a light meter and definitely start to monitor your temperature and relative humidity conditions and wherever you're raising your young plants. No matter what, we didn't talk about that, but those can be hand in hand. How plants respond and how hardy they are can be in response to the environmental conditions as well as the light. And a quote from a very smart scientist is, raise a great child, you're more likely to end up with a great adult. So if you're not currently using supplemental lighting, but are considering it, think about how you're going to use that lighting to steer the crop and raise a great adult. make sure that when you're lighting for younger plants that you stick with an 18-hour or more schedule. If you get closer to that 12-hour lighting schedule, you'll accidentally flower your plants, which is something I did back when I went on vacation one time and my friends didn't keep the lighting schedule properly. And I thought about definitely getting a timer, and now I have a timer. So maybe don't manually manage your photo period, but think about getting a timer. Modulate your light intensity by raising or lowering your lights or having a dimmer, like my colleague who was quoted earlier. And when selecting light fixtures, select a light recipe that optimizes that ratio of red to blue and red to far red. So think about managing, modulating, selecting, and monitoring. And I think that you all will have a greater opportunity for some hardier starts. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I'm definitely happy to be in touch with Vermont growers of any type, and look forward to working more deeply with Vermonters going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Gretchen. That was great. A great overview. We do have a question we have time for questions too. So if folks have questions for Gretchen, please put them in the chat box. I think you probably already answered this, but someone was asking which light colors are needed for hemp. I think for each growth stage or oil development, I mean, does the type of lighting change as the plant goes through different developmental stages? And I think you probably already answered this, but.
It's a good question, and one that has a longer answer. One thing that I will share is that blue and red are kind of like opposite sides of the coin. So when thinking about red to blue ratio, you're kind of thinking about biomass to quality ratio. So if you give more blue, you might be affecting more quality, like maybe you're creating more production of phytochemicals, because blue is actually a wavelength that starts to stress your plants, which is why things like UV can induce greater production of phytochemicals in some studies. Red is the one that's going to induce more biomass production. So it's good to think about if your priority is oil production from hemp seed, that might be something that has a particular red to blue ratio that you're going to find out through trial and error. The best red to blue ratio for tomato biomass production, for example, is 19:1. Is that the best for hemp oil? Is it the best for hemp flower? Can't yet tell you, but I do think that that is something to think about, is that the plant is going to make a choice between what it does with that photonic energy. Is it going to use it to create phytochemicals, or is it going to use it to create biomass? And that's really the play between phytochemicals, red and blue. Biomass is red, phytochemicals is blue. And I'll take the time to answer the second question I saw in the Q&A. What are the PPE requirements for certain light recipes? This is a great question, and also one that can kind of be a little confusing. So PPE is technically separate from light recipe, but light recipe affects PPE. That is because red diodes are more energy efficient than blue diodes. And so when we look at these particular recipes here, this recipe is an HPS, a much less by default efficient light that compared to an LED. So its PPE might just be in like the 1.7 range, just by nature of the hardware. The light recipe doesn't matter because it can't have a customizable recipe. An LED light fixture, however, can have a PPE anywhere between 2.0 and over 3. Light recipes are kind of being tailored to kind of like in the beer world, maximize efficacy while also maximizing yield. And so they're trying to figure out how high can we go in terms of efficacy. And they often will load the LED boards with more red diodes to get that high PPE. But if you're looking for a specific red to blue ratio, you might find that you wanted more blue, and the really highly efficacious fixture might not be best for you. In summary, the narrow band LEDs are more efficacious than the wide broad spectrum LEDs, because by nature, the broad spectrum LEDs include more blue, and blue is less efficacious. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So there are some other questions. If you were to start plants in an unlighted greenhouse, can you start now without any issues?
You could start plants in an unlighted greenhouse now. What I would say is that you're maybe just going to have a longer harvest cycle than someone who uses some supplemental light. That's one thing. So is harvest cycle a priority for you? You might also find that because the plants are getting potentially let's go back to that image of DLI and PPFD. Maybe you're just using the sun and it's getting a nice DLI, but the DLI could be higher if you added that electric lighting. It's not to say that you need to. I would just recommend monitoring. Find out what is the PPFD you're getting in that greenhouse without any lighting whatsoever, and figure out, is that effective for me for cannabis at this stage of growth? You know, growers in the later stages of plant growth might be using 1,000 PPFD, but in a early stage of plant growth, you might be needing something closer to 200. So find out what's right for you in your week. You might find that, okay, if we're not gonna have a sunny week, but I really need that plant to be getting a good specific PPFD that adds up to a DLI that's going to achieve the biomass production I want, or the height that I want, or the leaf production I want, that's when the electric lighting starts to come in. So I've got a great south facing passive solar greenhouse. So it's at a good temperature right now, gets great insolation. The photoperiod's good, but if I considered growing cannabis in it, I probably would still supplement the light because I want to get more harvest cycles out of that seasonal use. So I hope that answers your question as well.
So Gretchen, there is another question somewhat related, asking about light meter suggestions. Do you have any suggestions of good light meters to purchase?
Yeah, RII tries to be brand agnostic, and actually we don't have any members that make light meters, so you can know that I have no skin in the game. You can see a picture here is Apogee. It's a very, very trusted light meter. There's lots of different price points for light meters as well. I actually have a slide from a different workshop on kind of like some different recommendations. So if anybody has a specific question about light meters, feel free to email me, but there are price points and there are degrees of granularity. So just check out the specification sheet and find out how much do I care about how wide is the tolerance or the accuracy of this particular light meter. And LICOR is another option, LICOR, just so I don't end up saying only one brand, but they're in the scientific instruments community. And so the one thing I'll mention is don't use a light meters that's meant for humans. These are meant to, they have to measure a completely different unit. And so you can technically convert from lux or foot candles to PPFD, but I wouldn't recommend using that as your way to grow. I think it's a good investment to get a real monitoring system for plants.
Great. Do you have any suggestions on purchasing lights? The price range is all over the place, very cheap
Yes.
to expensive. So especially if you're growing hemp on a larger scale, any suggestions?
Yeah, I'll share with you. And this is another nonprofit, and they are the third-party certification organization in the horticultural lighting space. They currently, like I mentioned, are only certifying fixtures, but they have in their new technical requirements added lamps. And so what I would do is check out the technical requirements of the Design Lights Consortium. It's kind of a nerdy document, but this is what they use to allow fixtures to be listed. And so you can find out these and find out, driver lifetime warranty, what is considered the good baseline, and then I can maybe go beyond it. Efficiency Vermont has a grow light program, so you can get support for larger grow lights. They don't currently support lamps, but I would suggest checking out the technical requirements here. And then when you're looking at buying lamps, if you're, say, in the position of taking a look at some of those TLED replacements, for example, I know that the price points are all over the map. I would say take a look at a light fixture manufacturer that's been doing the business for a long time. One that might have a warranty option for you to be able to do trials and have a customer service and support. It's also good to probably at this point, any of you get in touch with your efficiency program. If you're in Vermont and you're thinking about buying horticultural lighting, get in touch with Efficiency Vermont. They want to talk to you and they would be happy to help you figure out the right light options in good cost-effective fixtures for you. They might not be able to provide an incentive at this time, but I would check it out. And if you're in Burlington, check out Burlington Electric. So if you want to get in touch with me with specific questions about vetting light fixtures, I would be happy to be a resource or recommend you to one of the people who offered these awesome quotes.
Great. I think we'll finish up with this last question on what are your thoughts on running lights 24 hours per day for cannabis during the vegetative stage?
You can, and it may not result in more yield. It may. There are so many variables at play, But if you think about it, at the very least, you're giving the plant more photons to do things with and create more biomass. I know that growers do 24 hours a day, and some growers have seen benefit from it. And I've heard from others, like, for example, there's an efficiency utility in Massachusetts that's trying to figure out how to convince growers who are currently doing 24 hours to do 18, because they'd like to show that there's actually not that much benefit to doing 24, and to try and convince them to save energy by going back to 18. So I would say, like a lot of things with growing, it depends on your cultivation approach, and you might be able to maximize more biomass production by giving the plant more photons to do stuff with. It also depends on whether the plant needs a little bit of a night period at that time. But I'm not intelligent enough on plant science to speak on it yet. I think there's still more research being done.
Great. Thanks, Gretchen. And Gretchen had some wonderful resources. She herself is a great resource. And I think you already put your email address in the chat box, but
yeah, I'll be active in the chat after this.
Okay, perfect. So keep asking questions if you have any. Thanks, Gretchen. And next we have Lauren and Chris. I'm not sure who's going to speak first.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I think Chris and I, we have it planned out a little bit. So I think Chris is actually going to kick it off here.
Oh, good. Great.
Yeah, thanks, Heather and Lauren. And great presentation, Gretchen. Just to put a quick plug in, I would say Efficiency Maine here in the state of Maine has a similar program around horticultural lighting.
Efficiency Maine is awesome. Yeah, their program is great, and I know the engineer who runs it. So all Maine cultivators should also reach out with any questions for technical assistance or financial assistance too.
And Gretchen, there was one last question, if you want to put it in the chat or in the Q&A box, about eye protection.
Yeah, I'm addressing that one now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Chris.
Great. Yeah, thanks everybody. So my name is Chris Grigsby. I'm with MOFGA Certification Services. So we are USDA accredited since the inception of the National Organic Program in 2002. We're sort of a part of the larger organization of MOFGA, the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. And I think I'll pass it on off to Lauren to introduce herself and take the first section.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, and ditto. Thank you, Gretchen. That was really interesting. I loved all the technical aspect of everything you discussed. So thanks so much. My name is Lauren Tonti. I'm certification co-director with NOFA-NY Certified Organic. We're an accredited USDA National Organic Program organic certification organization. We certify about 1,100 operations in New York, as well as some states that border New York. And I have been involved a lot in developing the policies that NOFA-NY handles for how we interpret the regulations for certifying hemp, and we've been doing so since 2016. So briefly, what Chris and I are going to be talking about today, we're going to try to keep this to about 15 minutes, so there's plenty of time for questions at the end and some good discussion. And we're going to discuss the regulations and definitions in relation specifically to seeds and planting stock. And Chris is going to go over some very specific guidance as to how the regulations apply to hemp production. And what's really nice is even though we're two different organic certification organizations, we're 100% aligned in how we interpret the regulations for hemp production. So both of the guidance for both MOFGA and NOFA-NY do align really well. And then we'll also go over the approved pesticides for our respective states and that are also approved for organic use. And then we'll provide some information at the end with more resources for each of our websites. So I'm just going to share my screen quick and just show you the regulations. So I don't know how much folks are familiar with the organic regulations, but I highly recommend you can go online. You can just do a search for National Organic Program regulations. The full manual will come up from the National Organic Program website. And this is specifically the regulation 205-204 seeds and planting stock practice standard that you can get right from that manual. Of course, myself and Chris could also send you a copy of our respective manuals that also has our guidance documents contained within. But this is the crux of what we want to talk about today. And so there's definitions at the top, and those terms are within this regulation. So it's helpful for you to reference those definitions. But so yeah, so the seed and planting stock practice standard says that a producer must use organically grown seeds, annual seedlings, and planting stock unless, and then there's various exceptions to this rule. A very important exception here is if certified organic seeds, annual seedlings, or planting stock are not available, are not commercially available, then it is okay to use untreated and non-GMO seed as long as there is a search conducted. So you can see there above, the definition of commercially available is the ability to obtain a production input in appropriate form, quality, or quantity to fulfill an essential function, excuse me. So that is something we often see a lot. We see this certainly in the hemp production world, as there really is not a high scale amount of certified organic hemp seed. And then there's so then if untreated seed is being used, there are some treatments that may be allowed, but they do need to be on the national list of allowed and prohibited substances, which is part of the regulations, which we're not going to go over, but you could always find that out or ask your certifier. Always when in doubt, just ask your certifier everything. And then annual seedlings are seeds, and Chris will go into a lot of this more in detail, but annual seedlings are basically seedlings transplants that are produced from seed. And then planting stock is everything else other than an annual seedling. So this could be rhizome, shoots, cuttings, tubers, etc. And they are, planting stock is subject to commercial availability, while you'll see here, annual seedlings are not. So there are no exceptions for annual seedlings to this rule here. They must be certified organic and come with a valid organic certificate. And then you can read the rest of the regulations down below. I don't want to get into them because they don't necessarily apply much to hemp, although you'll see there at the bottom, 5 does have a potential exemption when there are state phytosanitary regulations. We've only run into that once and not even related to hemp. So yeah, so I'm just gonna pass it off to Chris to kind of go into more detail as to how all of this really works in the day-to-day and some of the operations that we actually see. So I'm gonna stop sharing in case you wanted to share, Chris.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lauren. I think I will share, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull up our website. So this is MOFGAcertification.org. And I've pulled up the Certifying Hemp page. So we have most all of our guidance and our application materials and things like that for various production scopes, all listed on our website. And so you can see here we have a Certifying Hemp page, which is in conjunction with the vegetables and other crops. So that's, I think, something to keep in mind, is that, you know, hemp as a crop falls under the crop scope of the National Organic Program, and so therefore any of the applicable requirements under the crop scope would apply to hemp. And then in addition to that, there are some additional pieces for hemp specifically that we found was, I think, helpful enough to put a web page together. So anyway, this is just going through this sort of speaks to, you know, in addition to the crops applications and all of the other pieces and requirements around materials lists and maps and, you know, things like that. we put together some specific documents as far as both part of the application that would need to be submitted back to us, which is the hemp supplement, which asks specific questions about the hemp production, post-harvest handling, things of that nature. And then we also put together a compliance affidavit, which is similar to what a lot of other certifiers have done. And the reason for this is because we just want to make sure that there's a determination and an understanding from the operation that the National Organic Program is really just one particular regulatory lane that a hemp producer needs to navigate. And so there are, other pieces, whether it's the state program or USDA domestic hemp program licensure, things of that nature. So that compliance affidavit is really just our way of saying the organic regulation and your organic certification does not cover all of these other requirements as well. But specifically, I wanted to get into what we put together as a hemp guidance. And I hope everybody can see that okay. So at any rate, this is just sort of a helpful, opportunity to say, hey, these are all the pieces around hemp. There's all of the other NOP regulatory pieces in the crop scope, but specific to hemp. And so, again, for us, it's like if you're planning to do anything with your hemp crop beyond basic drying, there's an on-farm processing supplement or a potential handling plan, which ventures into the handling scope of the National Organic Program regulations. So again, licensing, we require, and I think NOFA-New York does as well, and probably most certifiers would require you to submit your state license application so that we can then be matching up, GPS coordinates of field locations and things like that with what are being submitted on the organic side. But I think specifically to get into the seedlings, and planting stock, also known as clones. So we, there are just a lot of questions, I think, from hemp growers around this. And so as Lauren mentioned, there are commercial availability exemptions within the rule and things like that. But we sort of feel like this is a really important piece, I think, for everybody to understand. And so at this point, there aren't a lot of certified organic seed out there. So I think a lot of hemp growers would be using the commercial availability exemption. And so in those cases, as Lauren mentioned, we require that operations at least search for 3 likely sources of seed before purchasing a non-certified organic version. And so I think that, there's definitely pieces around that in terms of genetics and, potential performance in a particular geographic region, those types of things. And so theoretically, again, that record and that documentation of the seed search, we feel is pretty straightforward, and it at least helps to satisfy the commercial availability requirements. So again, here's the purchase seed and planting stock must be certified organic unless not commercially available. So again, as Lauren mentioned, treated, coated with prohibited materials, fungicides or fertilizers, any genetic engineered seed varieties, or genetically engineered inoculants, et cetera. And then in terms of imported planting and stock, some of those phytosanitary documents may be needed. But specifically, I just wanted to mention one of the things that comes up for hemp, I think a lot, is the feminized seed question. And so we, along with other certifiers, are aligned and consistent around how feminized seeds can be utilized in a certified organic situation. And so we're familiar with 2 different general types of feminization, one being chemically induced, the other being stress induced, which might just be sort of light deprivation or those kind of techniques. But in most cases, anybody that's producing a hemp seed that's going to be offered commercially is likely going to be using the chemically induced feminization. And so that could be silver thiosulfate or colloidal silver, where that gets applied directly to the plant, which then stresses the plant to the point where it kicks out that feminized pollen and seeds as well at that point. And so one of the things that, anybody that's applying any of those compounds to an organic plant, immediately disqualifies that plant from being utilized moving forward in an organic system. So the way that we like to push this out is that, if you have, say, five mother plants, you hit plant 1 with colloidal silver, it's going to stress the plant to the point where that plant would then start producing feminized seed and feminized pollen. Both the seeds and the plant itself are then disqualified because they've been treated with a prohibited substance. But the feminized pollen that's created from that plant can then be taken, because it's a natural agricultural product, it can then be taken and moved to the remaining 3 or 4, however many plants or future generation, and can be applied to those plants, the pollen only, to produce those feminized seeds. And that's something that would be accepted by most certifiers, at least all the ones that I think we're aware of at this point. So that, I think, is a really big, important piece to keep in mind. And essentially at this point, we ask an operation to procure documentation from the seed source. Basically, whether it's through an affidavit or a conformity letter or something like that, that would say, this is our feminization process, and we are following, the generally accepted organic methods and practices, and disqualifying that plant that had prohibited substances applied to it. So otherwise than that, I think, we do talk a little bit about annual seedlings. We consider annual seedlings to be, produced from seed. The seed itself may or may not necessarily need to be certified organic, but then the production and that seedling itself, in order for that to move on and be sold out in the marketplace, would require organic certification and all of the other pieces that would come along with that. So clones at this point, I think, is a little bit of a more stickier situation, because, generally clones are considered planting stock, equivalent to planting stock. However, as Lauren's definitions described, an annual seedling is one that's going to finish its life cycle within a given season and not necessarily be a perennial producer and those kind of things. And so I think that is something that's a little bit stickier within the certifier community at this point, as far as how clones are treated, whether they're planting stock or whether they're annual seedlings. And we haven't really run into this so far. We've only been certifying hemp on the organic side. Just last year was our first year getting into that, based on the state program and things and the farm bills. But we definitely feel like the clones themselves really should be considered an annual seedling because of that life cycle. Even though the mothers may be able to be, kept going for quite some time. I think, again, the jury's still out on that. I know that the certifier community is working towards potential best practices or consistency around that. So I think I'll go ahead and maybe stop sharing for now. And then let me see, I guess, I don't know, Lauren, do we want to stop and take questions there? Or do we want to just kind of keep rolling through and just sharing about the two-part approval process around some pesticides?
Yeah, I think we might as well just get through that, since it'll be really quick. And then I do have a slide with some from New York, and then a slide with some info about NOFA resources. So if you want to just talk first about the approval for pesticides in your area, then I'll go after you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hopefully everybody can see this. So this is just a shared spreadsheet that was released by the state of Maine, the Maine Hemp Program. And I think I saw Gary and Mary on the call here as well. But the Board of Pesticide Control in the state of Maine is charged with overseeing registering of products for use, pesticide products for use in the state of Maine. And so they just put this out, and I believe it's on the Maine Hemp page. If you just Googled Maine Hemp, I think you'll get to the Department of Ag, Conservation and Forestry page. And I think this spreadsheet has now been moved into what they call the Hemp Handbook. So at the very bottom of that web page, and some of the resource links there's a Hemp Handbook, and I think you can find this list there as well. But what I did is I pulled it up and just kind of highlighted in yellow products that are registered for use in the state of Maine, which are either going to be labeled for all plants or they're going to be labeled specifically for hemp. And these highlighted yellow ones are ones that are both registered for use in the state of Maine, and they're also approved for use in organic production. So that's just it's a two-part process with several states, where the organic certifier may be able to say yes or no on a particular pesticide that you may want to use on your crop. But there's a secondary process there where you've got to also check to see if it's registered for use within your particular state. And so you can see some of I don't know if it's half, but there's definitely a fair amount of products that are listed on the Maine state approved list here that would also be approved in an organic system. So I guess I just wanted to sort of toss that out there and just, you know, mention that and sort of show a few things that are available that would be considered approved for use in organic as well. Some of them may have restrictions. One of the big restrictions in terms of pesticide use in an organic system is the pest control hierarchy, where you can't just go for the bottle every single time. There's a process around developing, you know, environmental, cultural, mechanical controls, and trying to remove the potential pressure through those methods before going to a pesticide product. But that being said, it's understood that that is an issue in organic production as well, and there are lots of approved for organic pesticide options as well.
Thanks, Chris. And then I will show some of ours as well. And so this is, so New York State has a registered pesticide website, and there's a link right here, which you can check out. I think that this will be recorded and shared with folks, hopefully, and then you can have this link. So this is just, this is not an exhaustive list at all. These are just the ones that I was able to pull from the website and then confirm that they're also approved for organic use per our database, or from OMRI, which is the Organic Material Review Institute, which is an organization that reviews materials for approval to the USDA National Organic Program regulations. So this is always subject to change, and it looks like New York State's list is growing in terms of pesticides that they are approving. But again, if you find a pesticide on that list that you'd like to use, definitely check with your certifier to just make sure it is still approved. There's a lot of false claims out there. There's a lot of changes. So it's always good to just confirm. And then I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about NOFA New York, and you can go to some of these links on our website to find out how to apply for organic certification, some of the hemp add-on forms that we offer, and our guidance document as well, which is fairly similar to what Chris just covered in terms of MOFGA's guidance. And then my email address is there. I'm happy to talk to folks. And then also Kristen Barker is our crop certification coordinator, and she would be the main person that you talk to in our office to get all of your detailed hemp certification questions answered. So anything else you wanted to share, Chris, before we open it up?
Yeah, well, I guess and maybe this is opening it up, but I saw a question in the chat around compost teas. So just it looks like John mentioned that it was, and in most cases, I would say compost tea would be something that would be allowed in certified organic. I think it really depends. There's a lot that goes within that as far as what the recipe is and what the feedstocks are and all of those different components that you'd want to disclose. And then to the second question, if not certified organic, can a farmer say they use organic methods but are not certified organic? That one's a little bit trickier because there is a small producer exemption within the rule that says that if you're grossing under $5,000 per year in sales, then you can say that your product is organic, but you still, technically have to keep records and sort of prove that if the National Organic Program ever knocked on your door. But otherwise than that, it's a bit of a sticky situation, and there's definitely a lot of misuse of the term organic out there, because I think technically if you're grossing over $5,000 in a year and you're using any organic terms, you should be certified for that.
Yep, and the NOP has really been increasing their staff. They've more than doubled their staff in the last couple of years, and they're really looking pretty closely at this, as well as doing a lot of work with overseas fraud prevention. So yeah, so we're noticing that they're going after people using the term organic without being certified a lot lately. So
camera is working. Great. Well, that was excellent. Thank you for the presentation. There are some more questions in the Q&A box, and I just want to encourage everyone to get their questions in. We do have a few minutes. So Mary had a question about like any certified organic crop, her assumption is that hemp may be randomly sampled by the certifier for pesticide testing. Is that true? Just like any other crop?
Well, that's a really good question. So the organic regulations do require that certifiers do residue testing of their operations, and currently it's a minimum of 5% of your certified operations should have a residue sample. There's a little bit of trickiness with residue sampling of hemp, and Chris, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. But because of how complicated hemp has been in our country to produce and to transport and all of that, we've run into some issues with our testing company, our testing agency that takes these samples, and in all of it's just difficult for us to get a hemp sample in there because they're federally managed. And then, for a while, hemp was it was recognized as a controlled substance, and now isn't, but there's still a lot of regulatory lag time with that. And so I think getting a hemp sample in there for us has just been rather challenging. So in theory, yes, and maybe that'll become easier, but we haven't been successful at getting a residue sample in yet from a hemp crop. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, same for us. And, again, where we just started certifying organic hemp last year, we felt the same. And I think hearing from other certifiers just about the challenges of sending to out-of-state labs and the transport challenges. I think for us, we're hopeful that the THC cannabis and the adult use market here in Maine, and it sounds like that's going to be happening in New York as well. The Office of Marijuana Policy here is actually utilizing the NOP's list of prohibited pesticides as their marker for these labs that come online in state for testing. And so I think we're hopeful that we'll be able to send both THC cannabis for our clean cannabis program, as well as hemp to state agencies, so long as they're ISO accredited and things of that nature. But yeah, I agree. We haven't done it yet, but I think that's the hope. And yeah, presumably we'll be able to do that without issue moving forward.
Great. There is another question about similarities between NOFA New York and Maine's pesticide lists. Are they pretty similar, or do you know?
It looked like they were, at least from some of those manufacturers.
Yeah, I think, and just to be clear, that's only partially NOFA's list, right? I mean, so New York State has their list of what is approved to be used in the state, and then we take that list, and now I'll look further of that list what is approved for organic, whether it was NOFA New York reviewing it or OMRI reviewing it. But yeah, so there could be similarities. I think it just because I think a lot of the states are acknowledging a lot of these different materials that are in need to be used by hemp operations. So I think that there could be some similarities for sure, and that could change at any time. Right, and someone is saying here in the chat, never use another state's list to choose pesticides. Definitely a good point.
Gary, you can unmute yourself if you want. I saw your hand bobbing up and down, even though it wasn't.
Yeah, I did. Just to reiterate the point that if you're growing in Maine, you need to use the Maine list. If you're growing in Vermont, you need to use the Vermont list, if there is one, because every state registers different pesticides, and New York registers a whole lot more pesticides than the state of Maine does. So you can get into a lot of trouble that way.
Yeah, I see Stephanie Smith is on the call too. And I know we do have a list in Vermont. Stephanie, I don't know if you want to talk to that or not, but
Yeah, we revised our guidance. We had a list that we'd produced, but now you have to have your pesticide registered in Vermont, or the pesticide has to be registered with the Vermont program. And this is just pesticides broadly. This isn't necessarily organic. And then there's a bunch of pesticides that EPA has approved for use on hemp. And so there's that list, and then what is registered in Vermont. But we have guidance on our website, so folks can look there if they're growing in Vermont.
Right.
Great.
And just because EPA registers it doesn't mean you can use it in your state, because if it's not registered by your state lead agency, then it's not legal to use it in the state.
Correct.
great. Thanks.
So-
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, so if a state doesn't have a register program, does that mean a farmer can look to the EPA list?
Every state registers pesticides.
Okay, thanks.
Well, this
The only exception could be for what are called 25B exempt pesticides, which some states do regulate and others do not. In Maine, we register those 25B pesticides. Other states do not. I don't know which ones do or do not.
Great. Thank you, Gary and Stephanie. Always great to have you here to help answer questions. We are up on our time today, and I want to thank our speakers. We will be hearing from Gretchen again in May. We're going to try to schedule webinars monthly. So if you have any ideas about topics that you want to hear about, please email those to us or put them in the chat box. We have gotten some really great suggestions, so we'll be lining up some additional topics for the coming months. But like I said, in May, Gretchen will be back talking to us about irrigation and water use in hemp. And thank you, Chris. It looks like you're answering the question on biodegradable plastic mulch, so that's super. And I just want to thank our speakers again for joining us today. And like I said, if you want to hear more about organic and organic requirements or pesticides, or anything that you really want to learn more about, and even if you have ideas for speakers or you want to be a speaker, just reach out, and we would really appreciate that. And with that, thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Chris, Lauren, Gretchen. We really appreciate it.